Joining me today is the top ranked light heavyweight in Australia and New Zealand. He's also the third ranked middleweight contender in the region. And on September 9th, he will challenge Matt Myers for the Eternal MMA Middleweight Title. He joins me today from Auckland, New Zealand. His name's Brogan Anderson. Brogan, the arm collector. I appreciate your time, my friend.
All good. Thanks for having me on, dude. Happy to be here.
It is a huge honor. And originally, I hope I say it right, you're from Dunedin, New Zealand, and you live in Auckland currently. And you've been a professional for a decade plus. And I'm very curious to understand what the MMA scene looked like in New Zealand before Dan Hooker was a name, before Israel Adesanya was a name. Um, I'm just really curious to see through your eyes what the world of MMA looked like, in 2012, 2013.
Yeah, I guess when did I start training? Maybe '09, '08. Oh, no, not quite that long ago. Yeah, '09 or 10. And yeah, it was very, very grassroots back then. But I think the first MMA show I ever went to down in Dunedin, Dan Hooker was fighting on, maybe as like a 19 or 20-year-old. He was the main event then against a fella from Australia. And from that point on, I really kind of fell in love with the sport. It was incredible to see just the rawness of it, especially back then. But yeah, the knowledge here in New Zealand has always been like a good kickboxing country. But I think the knowledge of it for MMA wasn't quite there back in the day. So a lot of guys did a lot of traveling abroad, learned how to wrestle. Even the sport of jiu-jitsu everywhere, I suppose, has grown exponentially in the last in that time frame. So I guess everyone's level of jiu-jitsu has come up, but I guess it was severely lacking here in New Zealand back in the day. So a lot of when I started, we were just figuring it all out as we went along. We had the kickboxing fundamentals, but the grappling side of things, and MMA in general, the MMA elements were still it was still being learnt. Not everyone was an expert on the cage or an expert at getting up off the floor. But New Zealanders are pretty tough people in general, so there were some pretty hearty fights anyway. But yeah, the scene's come a long way. I guess back then there was a pretty grey area whether anyone was an amateur or a professional. Everyone was kind of just fighting in small gloves and throwing elbows anyway. And then a few years into that, we started figuring out that maybe we should have had like a proper amateur career, and then we go professional. And yeah, we kind of figured all that out along the way, I think. So, but it's in a great place now. And Dunedin, where I'm from, right down the bottom of the South Island, is a pretty small city, only about 100,000 people, but a pretty strong fight community down there. There's been pretty consistent shows down there my whole career, so I was fortunate enough to be able to fight in front of my home crowd for a good portion of my career. And now up in Auckland, in the big city, there's still consistent shows up here, but there's probably only two consistent shows running in New Zealand, and they're probably doing 2 or 3 shows a year each. So yeah, it's pretty limited here, and the scene in Australia is really getting stronger and stronger. So it's good to be able to be, especially a part of that for this next one.
You're a former rugby player. You look like the athlete. I could tell just by looking at you. And one of the things I'm curious to know is what was the hardest thing about making the switch over to MMA? I'm sure you've excelled in athletics your entire life, but there's a lot of athletic people that try to make that transition over to MMA and they don't do so well because of just how dynamic and how difficult it is.
Yeah, there was no carryover really, other than that I had some athleticism. Basically, that was it, and that I played a pretty rough sport already. But I was already pretty scrappy my teenage years, so I think that helped more than any rugby I ever played. I think, but yeah, I don't think there's much carryover, to be honest.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find really interesting is you see a lot of like athletes or especially stateside, you'll see wrestlers that, try to make that move. They think it'll be a seamless transition into MMA. And wrestling and MMA are very different. There are some similarities, of course, like wrestling isn't part of MMA, but they find out really quickly. And I'm good friends with a fighter, and he tells me, like, high level in the States, college wrestlers will try to come through an MMA gym and they don't do so well.
Yeah, like wrestling, I guess, is a brutal sport, and it conditions the mind and the body and creates like fantastic athletes. And obviously, wrestling in itself is an awesome base for MMA. But at the end of the day, some people just don't mind getting hit in the face and don't it doesn't stress them out too much. With some people just aren't that into that, and if they're a little bit hesitant or a little bit stressed when blows start flying their way, then it's probably not for them. No amount of wrestling will change that.
You are currently on a six-bout winning streak that dates back to 2017. Now, my son was born in 2016, and he just got his Taekwondo orange belt today. Just saying. So that's how long you've been winning. And like basically my entire son's lifetime, you've been winning. And I was just curious, like you ride a hot streak like that, seemingly so close to making it into the UFC. Of course, we have the pandemic that shuts everything down. I know that threw a wrench in your career. And now you're going to be competing again for the first time in almost 2 years. Like, what has that been like? What has the past couple years been like? Because I'm sure you have just been very, very eager to get back into the cage.
Yeah, it has been frustrating. I haven't been as active as I would have liked, especially in like a crucial part of my career. Just when I feel like I'm at the best I've ever been. Those have been like maybe when I was 32, or coming into my prime, and still in it now. Um, but yeah, like you said, like on the cusp, kind of waiting for those opportunities that didn't quite arise, and thinking we might have something here or might have something there, and then it just didn't quite come to fruition. So it's been a little bit frustrating in that regard. But I think this opportunity that came up with Eternal is a pretty good showcase, and probably as good an opportunity as I could have got on the local scene. So yeah, I'm just looking forward to getting back in there and showing everyone what I can do, and if it's good enough, then hopefully we'll get picked up by one of these major promotions for next year.
And so that is exactly, Brogan, what I was going to ask you. Eternal 78 that happens in Sydney, Australia. So there's going to be a lot of eyes on this particular card. And you look at this card, you see who's being featured on the bill. You're talking about some of like the top prospects in Oceania, like all on this card. And especially when you include yourself into the mix, the card is stacked from top to bottom, and you're headlining it. 2 years away, but you're still headlining it, and I think that says a lot about just kind of like your standing in the entire region. And when Eternal came to you and gave you this opportunity, did you know that it was going to fall on the same weekend as the UFC?
Yeah, yeah. When I spoke to Cam, the promoter, I was over in Perth cornering one of my guys over there, and he said to me that they'd definitely be interested in putting this fight on in Sydney, and that immediately appealed to me. That was, the UFC weekend. It's going to be such a big weekend over there, and obviously we've got all of our guys fighting over there from City Kickboxing. So for us to all be able to prepare together and to be a part of that is pretty special for me as well. And yeah, like in terms of like a local card, this is one of the best local cards, if not the best that has ever been on in Oceania. Basically, everyone on the main card is either a champion or former Eternal or another major promotion in Australasia's champion. And then even on the prelims, they've got huge talent. My teammate Brando is one of the best heavyweights around, a uber prospect, a guy that could compete in the UFC already probably, and he's fighting on the prelims. So just absolutely stacked. So yeah, I mean, to get the headline bill on that is a real honor. The co-main event between Matt Vale and Luciano could have easily been the main event as well. I think those are two super talented guys. So yeah, stoked to be headlining it. It's a real honor.
At the next level, sir, are you going to be in 185 pounds, the middleweight division, or are you going to, is your intent at the next level to fight at light heavyweight? Because you're kind of that guy that could probably do both, but I don't know how tough a cut 185 pounds. I don't know what that is in kilos. I'm sorry, but I don't know how tough a cut middleweight is for you, especially since you've been competing at light heavyweight for many years.
Yeah, no, middleweight is my division. Yeah, light heavyweight has just been to get the matchups basically. If there were matchups that were suitable at light heavyweight, I was happy to take them. I don't feel outmatched at that size, but against world class competition, against some of the guys that are fighting in that division that are 6'5" super athletes that are cutting down from 235, then maybe that's not the best division for me. Who when I walk around at 210. So yeah, middleweight is definitely the division for me, and I've fought as low as welterweight in the past, and could potentially get that low probably again if I absolutely had to. So yeah, I think middleweight is the sweet spot for me.
You are going to be going up against Matt Myers. He became the Eternal Middleweight Champion not that long ago. He's going to be making his first title defense against you. He is 6 fights into his career. He's already a champion. He beat a very formidable. He beat a formidable champion prior to. Now he finds himself in a situation where he has to defend against you. What do you know? What do you know about Matt Myers? What can you tell me about him as far as your take on him as a fighter in general?
Yeah, I think he's like pretty aggressive. He's young, or younger than me anyway. And reasonably inexperienced for a guy who's in that position. But an exciting prospect nonetheless. He's got a lot of not unorthodox, but like dangerous weapons. He's got a pretty unique arsenal. He's got a decent kicking game. He'll spin. He'll throw up elbows. He's pretty unique in that regard. And I know he's got a decent grappling caliber as well. I think he's a brown belt, and yeah, he can wrestle as well. So I think he's got a good skill set. But yeah, maybe just doesn't have that experience and composure. Seems to fight pretty aggressive. Just goes the whole time. Yeah, I respect him. I think he's a good challenge. It's a good challenge for me. It's a challenge that gets me excited. And he's the champion for a reason. Obviously, he won that last match over John Martin Fraser with a beautiful spinning back kick. And that was obviously a highlight reel finish for him. And he's got some other good finishes on his record as well over solid opponents. He's fought my teammate here, Kevin Doucet, a couple of times, and I think went the distance. And I know how good Kevin is, so that says something about him as well. He's obviously tough. So yeah, I've got all the respect in the world for him. I think it's a good challenge, and I think my skill set matches up well against his. And I'm just looking forward to going in there and putting on a good performance.
You're a very dangerous man and you finish fights. That's why you have the name that you do. That's why you have the reputation that you do. Men don't typically last too long. You're able to find out a way to end these fights. You've been gifted in that regard and you've proven that throughout the duration of your MMA career. Aside from you as like a fight finisher, are there other intangibles that you possess that give you an advantage over your opponent?
I just think my intelligence. I think my composure. I'm willing to go in there and kind of feel it out, take my time. But as soon as I sense an opportunity or any form of weakness, I'll jump on it. And I've got finishes and the potential to finish from any position, from on top, on the feet, from the bottom, in the scrambles. Yeah, you can't make any mistakes.
Well, on September 9th, sir, I look forward to watching you compete. I wanted to ask you kind of one final question before I let you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. It's a big deal, like you fighting, you representing New Zealand. It's a big deal. It's not a very big country. There's not a whole lot of New Zealanders that are competing at the like top level of MMA. So when you go out and fight, there are a lot of eyes that are on you. There are a lot of people that want to see you do well and go on to that next level. So, what is it that you want to tell all your supporters back home, the people that have been patiently waiting to watch you perform for almost 2 years? Do you have a message for those good people?
Yeah, just thanks for sticking with me all this time. I've been lucky enough that I've had incredible support, especially from my community in Dunedin over the years when I was competing down there. People that helped me travel the world and even make the move up here to Auckland so I can train full time at City Kickboxing. And just huge appreciation for all those people and everyone who wishes me well and supports me. I'm really excited. That's why I do this. So that I can make those people proud. So I can, so I can make it all worthwhile for those people that want to see me do well. Yeah.
Well done, Eden, New Zealand. You may very soon see your man compete in the UFC. I look forward to seeing that happen. And Brogan, I wanted to give you a final opportunity. If there's anyone, sir, that you would like to thank before I let you go, let's do it.
No, just thank you for having me on, dude. I appreciate the opportunity, getting the word out there and letting people know what's happening. Cheers.
Well, I appreciate you stopping by. I wish you the best of skill, and I look forward to having you back when you're in the UFC.